Welcome to the Public Voice Salon. My name is John Bredin. We are a progressive dialogue on culture, politics, and the critical issues of our time, broadcasting here in Washington Square Park, one of the great public spaces in America and in the world, and just here to reflect on our democracy and how things can be strengthened here. One of the concerns of our show is public voice and giving the public a voice, and just to say that this is a very special area for me right here, because right over there is NYU, and the School of Education was a place that was very good for me in helping me find my voice by teaching me how to teach in a very progressive way. Now I can empower my students to find their voices in the classroom, and this is what I do as a progressive English teacher, helping people to learn how to speak better and also to write and express themselves on paper. And also right over here there's a church called Judson Memorial Church, which I discovered 10 years ago. And I discovered this because I read an article in the New York Times about a conference on freedom of expression that was happening at that church 10 years ago. And in this conference they were reflecting about a lot of the justice movements that had begun at Judson, and that it's very famous for going back 40 years when you think about the 1960s, and the peace and love generation and the anti-war movements and the pro-labor and pro-women. Judson Church was very much in the center of that, and Greenwich Village as well. Greenwich Village historically is a place where a lot of people who felt like they didn't fit into the mainstream society would come, including writers and intellectuals and artists. And if you see that arch behind me, back in 1917, an artist named Marcel Duchamp, who was one of the great avant-garde artists, him and a group of people went up to the top of that arch, and they had a picnic lunch, and they declared Greenwich Village an independent country. Isn't that amazing? So this is a place of almost spiritual force, the village, and we're trying to keep this alive in the public space by having a show broadcast here on culture and politics, and we also welcome strangers to come by and be part of this, and if they want to say something, they could say something. This is a very democratic show, and as you see, somebody just came by on a bicycle, and it can't get any more democratic than this. And if you want to just listen, that's okay, or if you want to say something about the village or about the state of our democracy, this is a show on culture, politics, and the critical issues of our time, and it's called the Public Voice Salon. We're here to give a voice to the public. And I was explaining to our audience how that church over there, Judson Church, gave me a voice 10 years ago when I discovered that church, and it's very avant-garde, and it's into art and politics and social justice, and they have an open mic after the church where you could say, and it took me a year to get up at that open mic. I was terrified because everybody in that church is so smart and so radical and lefty, and I said, oh my God, I'm going to sound like a hick from Jersey. I live in Hoboken, New Jersey. We live in Hoboken. But I find the village has a meaning for not just New York, but for the world. I think Greenwich Village means something, and that's why I got involved with the Village Independent Democrats, which is a political club here, started by a man named Ed Koch, who passed away 2 days ago, who used to live in that building right behind the arch. And Ed Koch founded this club, the Village Independent Democrats, in 1957 to elect Adlai Stevenson for president. And that democratic spirit of that club goes on today. It was originally called Villagers for Stevenson, and now it's called the Village Independent Democrats. I've been a member for 10 years, the only New Jersey person active in that club. But I believe in democracy. And I believe in democracy as a teacher. I teach writing from a very, very social justice-oriented perspective. All my students have a voice to speak, and we put the chairs in a circle in my classes. Now I'm teaching at Essex County College in Newark, and I learned how to teach right here at NYU, so everything is right here. Now, sir, I want to ask you, would you like to say something to the public? What is your thoughts about this park, or about the village, or about democracy? Or Ed Koch, or anything? Tell us your name.
I'm Brian Kinerick. resident of the village. This park is a very special place. That church is a great spot too. I've been to several events there and I thoroughly enjoy it. I've made lasting connections.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's great to be here, and I love the new renovation.
Okay,
and
the park.
Yeah, and especially the little theater area just behind the camera.
Are you a theater person? Do you
No, I do like the
You're
theater.
Into arts?
Yeah, I'm into arts, theater. Yeah.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a commercial real estate broker.
Okay, very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. And where did you study?
I studied in New Hampshire.
Oh, what was your major?
Business.
Okay.
Yeah.
But obviously you have a feel for the arts, you have a feel for culture.
Sure.
Being a villager.
Yeah.
And the fact that you stop by here, this is very rare in our society. We're trying to overcome that alienation. You saw something percolating.
Wanted to see what you were doing.
Yes, indeed. But enough to stop and to...
I'm on a leisurely ride through the village. I've been out,
Yes.
most of the morning on my way home. So this is probably one of my last stops.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I've got some groceries.
Thank you for sharing some moments with us, Brian.
Yeah, you are?
John.
Nice to meet you, John.
And my wife, Claudia.
Beautiful.
Wow, well that was like a miracle, I mean, here we are, and this basically proves our theory that people are hungering for connection, We're living in a time of great alienation when people are disconnected from each other. And one of the things we're trying to do with our show, and what I try to do with all my projects, is to bring people together and to create that space, that openness for dialogue, for connection, for interconnection. And this is also a philosophical project. There's a philosophical meaning here. Last night I was doing research on Jürgen Habermas. Jürgen Habermas is a German philosopher. He's a very important thinker who came up with the idea of the public sphere. Now, what is the public sphere? The public sphere is a place where people can congregate and talk about stuff, and they could be critical of the society, and they could talk about the problems in the world and how to fix them, and they can make friends, and they can discuss art. And Habermas identified the coffee houses in London in the 18th century as the beginning of the public sphere, along with the salons that would happen in Paris, France, where artists and intellectuals would gather and they would discuss things of importance, and there was always a political dimension to these public spheres. And the thing that distinguished a public sphere, according to Habermas, is the fact that the church and the state do not control it. As we know, going back in history, churches have played a role of domination and oppression. Even today, I think some churches continue that, but many churches like Judson do the opposite, and liberate and do what the real message of Christ and the real message of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. There is a prophetic tradition in religion that is the opposite of that old oppressiveness of the church, and also the state, the kings, the rulers, But even today, tyrants, people who want to have an authoritarian government, these people don't go away. They're always out there. You have to be careful, They don't want people talking to each other. They don't like what we're doing right now. This is too open. This is too democratic. Which is why, if we want to strengthen our democracy, I think we need to continue to promote this kind of dialogue and this kind of interconnecting and strangers meeting each other in the public space and in cafes and discussing things. And that's why this show, this is really the deeper meaning of our show, the Public Voice Salon, progressive dialogue on cultural politics and the critical issues of our time. Here, 2 days after the death of Ed Koch, who was a great voice of democratic voice here in the village. We know his politics moved to the right over time. He got a little more conservative, but he was a very independent thinker. And one of the things I love about Ed Koch is that he always said, "How am I doing? How am I doing? How am I doing? Thank you." You see that? He said, "Great, thank you, thank you." In the spirit of Ed Koch, and I belong to an organization that he started called the Village Independent Democrats. Did you know that Ed Koch founded the Village Independent Democrats? And that's a club in this village. It's a very powerful club, political club, that's trying to keep democracy strong. And would you like to say some things to the public? That's okay. No. What's your name? Jimmy. Jimmy's here just watching and enjoying this, and he's giving us his energy. Your karma is one powerful. Thank you. And your doggie, what's your doggie's name?
This is Shadow.
Shannon.
Shadow.
Shadow. Look at Shadow. Perfect dog for a day like today with the snow on the ground. And what kind of dog is?
He's a purebred Siberian.
A purebred Siberian. Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you for listening and being part with your energy. Here it doesn't get any better, folks. This is Washington Square Park. Claudia and I live in Hoboken, which is also a very community-friendly town. It's a square-mile town. People know each other from the sidewalk, say hello. I'm a community builder. Our show is about building community. And I think we're losing that in our democracy, in our country today. People moving to the suburbs, don't talk to each other, everybody online on Facebook, and they're not face-to-face. We're trying to overcome that passivity just by having a TV show in the public like this. You know, we don't need talking heads, paid hacks. We want real people to come on here. We want to show everyday life as it's being lived, but also talk about the problems in our society. We know there are problems, right? We know there is extensive corporate control of the political system now and of the media, right? Which is why I'm probably not going to get hired by CBS anytime soon. Unless there's a shift in our politics and our society and we start to value democracy again, you know. We have environmental problems, you know, we have global warming. This is not being addressed, you know. But just happy to be alive here in Greenwich Village in this diverse and dynamic public space. I think we need more of these kind of spaces, you know, but certainly this park is very historical, and it's a pleasure and honor to be here, to pass through here. Reflections on Ed Koch also continue. I belong to the club that Ed Koch started, the Village Independent Democrats. That has helped me, being in that club has helped me find my voice. And now I'm on a TV show. I started my own TV show. So I think we need organizations, I think, and structures to help us grow, to help us with others. It's a social process. I believe that civic clubs matter, I think. Organizations matter. I belong to the Elks Club in Hoboken. Being an elk, you know, going to meetings and raising money for charity, these kind of things, you know. So I think churches play a good role. I think we have to overcome the isolation and alienation in our society. I also belong to an organization called the Network of Spiritual Progressives. No, the Network of Spiritual Progressives was founded by Michael Lerner and Cornel West. What we're trying to do is create a new bottom line in our society, a bottom line that values not only the expansion of money and power, but the expansion of love, kindness, caring, ecological sensitivity, and a sense of awe and wonder at the beauty of the natural world. Anybody against that? You know, I think as a culture we've become so money focused and so selfish. Everything is bottom line money. I think people need more time. We all need more time. I could use more time, you know, time to write, time to read, time to be with family and friends and community and grow. I think that's why we need a 25-hour work week. How does that sound, a 25-hour work week? Do I have your vote? I was running for president last year, but I don't know if I have to put my wife through that again in 2016 or not. I'm not sure if I'm going to run again, but just put that idea out there, you know. And if you don't like the Democratic Party, start a new party. What's so hard about that, you know? I mean, Ed Koch back in his day was a liberal. He was a real diehard, you know, progressive. He supported Adlai Stevenson. That's why he formed the Village Independent Democrat. It was called Villagers for Stevenson. That was the original name of the club. And if we see how far our politics has come in that time, when you had a president, a Republican named Dwight Eisenhower, who was more liberal than the Democrats are now, you know. So I think that we do need change. I'm here to try to promote this idea that we can have a different society, a society that's more caring, that takes care of the most vulnerable people, okay, and that addresses the real problems. But while this is all happening, we have to live our lives. We have to have fun. We have to enjoy each other. We have to stay strong, okay? And many of our viewers watching on the couch, you know, sometimes it's good to get off the couch, you know, and do things and join with others and talk to your neighbors and in cafes and in the street. And, you know, we have to build networks, I think, because I think when we're separate, then the democracy is weaker. You know, together there's strength, there's power. I'm a Jeffersonian Democrat, you know, going back to the old. And then you have this corporatization in our society. I think that's very terrible. And I think we need to push back on that. And there's always hope. Where there's life, there's hope. Thank you very much. I honor the memory of Ed Koch. 2 days after his passing, he lived a full, rich life, 88 years, you know. And even after he retired from politics, he stayed very active. He wrote about film. He always kept busy. I heard that once a week, Ed Koch and his friends would get together for lunch at his house, which is right behind me there, and they would talk, and they would share ideas, and they would tell stories, and then after that, they would start at Ed Koch's house. Then they would go to Chinatown, and they would find a place, and they would continue the discussion there. So the importance of dialogue, of discussion, I think that's very important. Anyway, this was nice that during this discussion here, this monologue, we had people attracted to join us. I think that's a very good spirit, that we want to continue that going forward. For now, this is John Bredin with the Public Voice Salon in Washington Square Park. We will continue our show in a few minutes. Okay, now I'm with my friend Sharon Willems, who's a resident of Greenwich Village, and Sharon and I met over 10 years ago at Judson Church during the coffee hour. She was nice enough to talk to me, and we've been friends ever since. And Sharon and I also have both served on the executive committee of the Village Independent Democrats, which is the club that Ed Koch founded, and Sharon went on to be the vice president of the Village Independent Democrats. And we're here reflecting on Ed Koch 2 days after his death, and Sharon actually has a story that she's going to share with us about an encounter she had with Ed Koch.
I have two stories.
Two stories, actually.
Okay, I'll go with the first one.
Okay.
All right, I live on the same block as Ed Koch ever since he lived here in this building here, 2 Fifth Avenue, and so we were having a lot of problems with motorcycles on our block, and they were making a lot of noise. So the block association, which I'm a founding member of, we decided we were going to try to do something about it. So we were to have a meeting on Thursday, and I just happened to run into Koch on Wednesday in front of his building. He just happened to be standing there waiting for the cab. Okay. Very convenient for me. So I said, oh, Mayor Koch, you know, we've got this problem with the motorcycles, and we're having a meeting. We'd love it if you would come to our block association meeting. And he said, I'm too high up. Well, for me it was a double entendre, because actually he lives on I think it was the 18th floor or something like that. So
okay.
I guess he meant he didn't hear it, but for me it had another meaning. But anyway,
that he was too high up to bother with
our little block association.
I like to try to think that the better angels of Ed Koch meant that he was in the high up on the floor.
To hear them,
yes,
so it wasn't his problem.
But this is an actual story, folks. This is a real story. And the second Ed Koch story?
The second Ed Koch story is that I have a friend who lives at 2 Fifth Avenue.
Yeah.
And my friend David Bernstein, he's always wanted an opportunity to talk to Koch, and was always looking for a hook, you know, and could never really manage a conversation with Ed Koch. So one day we were doing laundry together And so David and I...
You and David, or you and Ed Koch?
Me and David!
Sorry. Okay. Okay. Okay, yes.
But I will tell you the way David tells the story, because
Okay,
he loves to tell the story.
Okay.
So, you know, it just so happened that Ed Koch was coming down, and
In the elevator.
in the elevator,
Okay.
and so David quickly said, "Oh, Mr. Koch, this is Sharon Willems. She's vice president of Village Independent Democrats," and he just perked up because Mr. Koch VID gave him his wings, we like to think. Well,
But actually, you know what, Sharon? I just found out this
Okay.
weekend, there was an article in the newspaper about it.
Okay.
Ed Koch was actually one of the founders of the Village
Yes,
Independent.
VID.
So he created that club. He was
Yes.
the creator of the club.
but there was a
Yeah.
big brouhaha, big fight, whatever.
There was a falling out.
A falling out.
There was
You
a
wanna
falling
explain
out.
that? You
Well, the
probably-
falling out happened. Okay, the falling out happened when Mario Cuomo, who was the father of Andrew Cuomo, was running for governor in 1982, and Ed Koch was also running for governor. And at that point, the VID, the Village Independent Democrats, got behind Mario Cuomo. Well, the Koch people were furious, and there was a schism in the club between the Koch faction and the anti-Koch faction, and the Koch people left the Village Independent Democrats, and they started their own club.
Right.
So that's the falling out. But now, with the passing of Ed Koch, even people in the VID who, you know, maybe had some acrimony in the past have sort of, you know, feeling now that we have to
We're looking
concentrate
at-
on the positive side of the man and that all the good things that he's done. So, but
Yeah.
there was a falling out at one time, and Ed Koch had really nothing to do with the Village Independent Democrats for a long time,
Yeah.
until he encounters Sharon in the elevator of his building, and this is what happens now. Okay.
And so he perked up and he wanted to know all about the VID. So he actually went down to the basement with us and got out, you know, where the laundromat is,
Yes.
and just, you know, we had a nice little chat. David remembers it to be 30 minutes. I don't remember. Maybe. Okay.
well, yeah.
Could have been. I don't know.
Okay.
And then David likes to add.
Yes.
He likes to embroider.
Okay.
He said, and Mayor Koch even helped us do the laundry.
Oh my goodness. And, you know, and this is a meaningful story because I think it shows that as he got older, Ed Koch felt a certain, you know, conscience, a certain feeling of warmth about his roots, about this club that he's run. Maybe there was a falling out, okay. But as he got older, and then for him, Sharon represented that, wow, you know, you belong to the Village Independent Democrats. And so I think that was a very touching story that this happened, and we thank you for sharing that with us, Sharon. Now that you're no longer the vice president of the Village Independent Democrats, as you go forward in life, what do you think, what was the experience of being in that club? What was...
Well, I would advise anybody and everybody to get involved in local politics because before I did, I could walk through the village and, you know, I enjoyed it very much and loved my city and everything, but I didn't really feel a part of it. But once you get involved and, you know, and try to make a difference, you know, and work with other people, get to know a lot of people, you feel a part of your community, and that is a really good thing.
Yes, and you know, there's a coziness. You know, there's a sense of community, of connection. When someone has a coffee pot on, and there's homemade cookies from Keen Burger, our friend Keen Burger, who's a district leader of Greenwich Village, makes delicious chocolate chip cookies, and then you can really discuss things and really, you know, feel like not so alienated, not just listening to the talking heads, you know, sitting at home, but part of the process, part of the democratic process, and so.
You learn a lot, you know, and you end up doing things you never thought you were capable of doing, even. And that's great. It's a really good thing.
And, you know, one thing, I happen to think that the Village Independent Democrats could also be a model for political clubs all across the country, because I don't see clubs like that. They're not as active. They're not as, you know, we have fabulous guest speakers who come in and give us talks about different issues and things like that. And a lot of political clubs in the country are like what they call hack clubs. You know,
Right.
They just sort of spring up overnight when someone needs to get elected, and there's no sense of community, there's no sense of continuity. But the Village Democrats was founded in 1957 to elect Adlai Stevenson, and so Sharon, thank you so much for being on our show, for sharing your stories with us, And we wish you a very productive, healthy, happy new year and all your new endeavors. And whenever you would like to come back on our show to share your thoughts about politics or culture or community or just to tell a story, you're welcome back on our show.
Thank you.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed our segment in Washington Square Park. Now we're on the other side of the Hudson River in our beloved Hoboken, where we live, and we're in Symposia Bookstore, community bookstore that's a nonprofit. And actually, this is the place where we started our TV show 2 years ago in a series of roundtable dialogues that went on for 1 year. And we love to come back from time to time and touch base here. And again, the theme of our show is community, is caring, and also intellectual life and discourse and art. And we think that, as I said earlier, that there's a decline of the public spheres like this. Jürgen Habermas, who was a philosopher, identified the notion of a public sphere. The old coffee houses in London, the Paris salons, and we're trying to revive that in the art of neighborly discourse and building our democracy. And I just realized that today is actually Super Bowl Sunday. I am not a big fan of football, although if the Giants or Jets are in it, then I'll go for the home team. This is the hometown of Eli Manning, who is a neighbor, is a quarterback for the Giants. But another thing to say about organized sports, I think, and it's something to reflect on, is how I think it's part of the Bredin circus media, that people are so focused on these big spectacle events and they're not focusing on things that really matter. People are distracted by this whole spectacle of the sports. And what if community created that kind of interest, that people who were all lining up to go to the Super Bowl would want to be part of a neighborly sort of discourse like this. I think that's something to keep in mind. We're here with Richard and Philip, and they are two citizens of Hudson County, and they're going to share their thoughts with us today. And what do they think the state of American democracy is? Okay, and that's a tough one. No, I know. And also, any thoughts about culture? Any books that they're reading, maybe? Since we're in a bookstore here, we try to bring intellectual life out to the public. And let's just start by saying, what's on your minds? This is a talking stick, and we're trying to get back to community, back to face-to-face dialogue. So who would like to start?
No, he's already warmed up, so we'll let Phil.
Basically, I think it's a wonderful notion to try to get people together. And it doesn't matter what the theme is. The glue that binds is just need to be social. And I'm doing what I'm attempting to do myself is trying that very notion of gathering people, gathering passions together, that some spark might illumine minds as well as hearts. And hopefully the idea catches on. And because the alternative people not gathering is dispersal. And dispersal translates to distrust, which I believe is where we are today, is we're not so trustful of one another. And what you're doing is a wonderful notion, which requires elaboration, which requires people to get together. And so basically, this is what I wanted to say.
You think we could sell tickets for this? $200, like front row seat for the Super Bowl? No, I'm only kidding. Richard Margolin, who's been a guest on our show in the past, and I want to welcome Phil as our first appearance on our show, and tremendous things that you just said. I hope a lot of people hear that and hear that wisdom, and we move this forward. Richard, last week I was in a cafe on Washington Street, and I saw somebody who I know walking by the street, because there's a window in the cafe that looks out. Frankie from the Holy Name Society. I belonged to the Holy Name Society of St. Anne's Church for 5 years. I was the secretary there. And again, it was community, it was spiritual, it was a lot of good food, Italian food. We used to have pizza nights, Look up, hey, there's Frankie walking by. I run outside, hey, Frankie, how you doing? Shake his hand, hey, haven't seen you in a while, blah, blah, blah. And I turn around and I see Richard. Haven't seen Richard in a while. Richard, what are you doing? We start talking on the avenue. They used to call Washington Street the Avenue years ago. It's like this public sphere. So we start talking. I said, Richard, I'm in the cafe. Why don't you come in? He comes in. We sit down for 2 hours talking nonstop, culture, politics. We cover the waterfront. That is what I'm talking about, community. Thank you, Richard, for sharing those moments and for actually, being the kind of person who's open. And in a culture, in a society, like you said, is becoming so alienating, and people overworked, and people having to be compartmentalized and fragmented, we need to get back to this discourse and dialogue. I read a wonderful book called New York Intellect. It talks about like intellectuals like John Dewey and George Meade, and they would hang out in Greenwich Village cafes, and they would see each other on the street, and they would just strike up, what are you working on? What are you reading? And they would have these discussions. And that's what this reminded me of. So, Richard, what are your thoughts today on Super Bowl Sunday? And what are your thoughts about community and democracy and the real issues that need to be addressed?
John, it was very gracious of you as far as an introduction. Actually, the 2 hours, as I recall it, I think it was like an hour and 59 minutes me and 1 minute, or 34 seconds you and 12 seconds the waiter. So I think it was like, so it was very nice of you. Yeah, I mean, it was funny. I didn't know until I think about early this afternoon that it was Super Bowl Sunday. Somebody mentioned it on the street, and I go, oh, I honestly, I don't, my television isn't even connected anymore. I mean, I have not watched television in my apartment for over 6 years now.
Wow.
I mean, if I go to Benny Tadino's and it's playing, I'll look up and see what people are into these days or whatever, but really I don't have it in.
You can watch our show on the computer.
Okay, and I can, yeah. Somebody told me that, I mean, one of the shows I used to watch, was Jon Stewart or whatever, and Rachel Maddow, I think, was on Jon Stewart once, and she said that she doesn't have a TV. That whatever she needs to watch, she watches on the computer. Anyway, so I'm sort of into this spiritual thing. Some holy man said that movies and television take you out of yourself, and it kind of made a very deep impression on me. And I've been experimenting with that, and I found that he's absolutely right. I mean, I felt what's the opposite of alienated?
Connected.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you get back, finding your roots and right, integrated maybe even. And it's funny. After 6 years, all of a sudden, for some reason, I'm reading the Old Testament, and it's having this extraordinary effect on me. I realized that this was the entire culture of Western civilization for a couple of thousand years, and maybe that has some reason. And I realized why people took it so seriously. Once you get beyond all your reflex pseudo-intellectual, it's not scientific kind of things. It's, it's some of the best stories ever told in human history. But as far as, I mean, a couple like things that are probably fairly superficial. I was pretty convinced that if Obama got reelected, that he would display an even fiercer right-wing conservative bent than he did in his first term. The blogger pundit Andrew Sullivan, gave Obama all this credit for actually being a conservative in his first 4 years. He thought that was great, but that's not why we elected him. But it seems to be turning out. I don't know if this is some sleight of hand or he's such a master PR fellow, but I mean, between John Kerry becoming Secretary of State and and trying to get Chuck Hagel in there, and who was the other person that actually was surprisingly progressive that he appointed, and I don't know if you can believe his speeches. I mean, he's always been a great speech maker, and he generally does the opposite of what he says he's going to do, but if global warming is his top priority, and what were the other two things that were supposedly the safety net, protecting Social Security, all these traditionally progressive things. That would be wonderful.
I see Enrique's pacing back there. Maybe you want to come on. Enrique, tell us a little something. You sure? You don't want to say anything? Or No. I want to make sure Enrique has something to say. Okay. So politics. So Richard always has something to say about politics. How can we have a stronger democracy? That's always part of the theme of the show. And I think the public, not, having knowledge of what's going on, and knowledge of history, and knowledge of, how we can also have a sense of hope to make a difference. Is the Democratic Party living up to its promise, or is it moving towards the right? We've seen evidence of that over the past 30 years. The Republicans have been very far right, have gone further to the right. I think they may have gone so far to the right now that they've lost legitimacy with most of the American public, But if the Democratic Party can't hold its ground in a progressive way, do we have to have a third party? Like a Green Party or a coalition on the left, and maybe that would persuade the Democrats to move in a more liberal, progressive direction. We see the problem with corporate control of our political process, where they give as much money to the Republicans as the Democrats, where the corporations are in control of media, And I really think the more and more that, and also education is being controlled by a corporate agenda. I see that in my students, who have very little knowledge of history coming into my classes, and I have to sort of teach them what is left and what is right. They don't know what is left and what is right. A lot of my students who are poor, who grew up in minority communities, poor communities, and devastated school systems that don't teach but train and teach to test, so that's all part of it. But I have hope that we can gather like in a cafe, like we're sharing these stories, we're shattering these silences, we're finding our voices on the air. I invite our viewers to be part of this dialogue and this discussion. And let's turn to culture a little bit, because I know you two guys are great for literature and literary things. And have you been reading anything interesting, any novels? I just finished a Philip Roth novel called Zuckerman Unbound, and I'm just so delighted again to be re-encountered with the genius of Philip Roth, who turns 80 years old this year and has finally decided to stop writing, but he's really given the world so many gifts. And in terms of your own writing and your own reading, let's give the public a little bit of a taste of our own intellectual life.
Okay. I think a lot of people have this kind of habit. I have a bunch of books that I bounce around to and from. The number seems to increase, and I actually, in addition to the Old Testament, I've been dabbling in Flaubert's sentimental education, which is Harold Bloom called him the ultimate, actually, artist of the novel.
Tell us a little bit about that book, just briefly to our audience, because we're running, we don't have that much time.
Okay, well, actually, as far as what I did want to get in, the book right now that I'm actually about 3/4 of the way through, which is very important. I encourage everyone to. I think it's even actually on Google Books, which now I believe you can get virtually any book. Maybe 1 or 2 chapters are deleted, but I think almost any book that's ever been published, you can get at Google Books now. It's a very scary phenomenon. But it's by Neil Postman. I think we discussed this. It's one of the best and most relevant titles, I think, possible. It's called Technopoly, The Surrender of Culture to Technology. And Postman is, historically, he might be up in the top 5 with Chomsky and a few other people as far as, I think the really important philosophers, social critics of the 20th century. And at first I thought it was just the surrender of the arts when he said culture to technology, but no, it was actually the surrender of entire society in toto. And he wrote this back in 1998, before even the internet started to take hold.
Wow. Why do I feel like a beer? I don't know why. If it's a Super Bowl Sunday, I feel like a 6-pack. Can we crack open? Gotta buy a beer, Phil. Can we crack open a six-pack and talk about literature and politics and intellectual stuff, or doesn't go with that, or I don't know. Maybe sipping wine would go better with that. I don't know. But you mentioned Neil Postman, and I met Neil Postman one time at NYU, where he was teaching, and I actually got my master's degree in education from the NYU School of Ed, and I was taking a course in history of education, taught by Jonathan Zimmerman, who was an historian, and Postman came into the class for something, and he looked at me. I had a blue sweater on, and he said, "Nice sweater, I like the color." And that was the only encounter I had with Postman, but he has, said some really important things. And Phil, did you want to share a little something about your reading life and what's happening intellectually, reading and writing? Okay.
I just tend to regard books as not storehouses for words, but rather something to reflect in, and I know immediately that I'm either going to be captured or repelled, either by the title or by actually opening up a book, which is an amazing thing, actually, to actually have the courage to open up a book. There have been times when I've been sitting in a store and people have come in and asked me, "Is there any good book to read?" Which is outrageous when you really consider the question. It's just I sense a lack of how would you call it? I mean, a lack of curiosity, a lack of daring. Just daring to trust yourself, your instincts, and but I've read books. This man has read books. Our approach may be different, but I think the result is the same. But I have to admit that as many books as I've read, I've not retained as much as I should have, which, again, I'm not quite certain what the percentage should be in retention, but I get the gist of it, and that's what's important. To be honest as well, I don't finish everything I read. And by the same token, I don't begin. I don't begin. Even though I'm to the end, I haven't begun the book yet.
Name a specific book that you've read recently.
Okay. I've been reading Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. In conjunction, I don't read books by themselves. It's always in conjunction with other books. It gives more relevance if you compare one author's mood with another's. And that's how I've done this the entire of my life. This has been my approach. In conjunction with Thoreau's Walden Pond. Wow. So while there's this old man dressed in white, conjuring up literature in one end of the world, there's another doing the same in another hemisphere. Different times, but I think basically the approach is the same. They're trying to disengage what is popular and reconnect with something more profound. Deconstruct in order to reconstruct in ways that make sense, humanistically speaking. And I think, if we can reduce it to that simple formula, I think we'd be better off. So God bless you, books.
Just want to say also that Tolstoy was a pacifist. He was a pacifist, Tolstoy was, and his last novel called Resurrection, which is his most political book, and it's about a person who transforms, a character who becomes different, it's a wealthy man who's very high up there in status, and by the end of the novel he has compassion for poor people. So as such, this is a very radical book, and when it became a play, my grandmother's benefactor starred in the leading role, the character Maslova of the play, and also in a film version of it, which came out in 1912, that was made by Adolf Zucker. And in some way I feel connected to Tolstoy through this woman who brought my grandmother to America from London, and I could go deeper into it. I'm actually going to make a film about this, about my connection with Tolstoy through my grandmother's benefactor, and the whole art and life connection. And I like to also, as a teacher of literature, put it out there to my students and anybody, how does literature impact your life, and how has it changed you? Because I think, you know, things that you see in novels, you can say, oh, I can relate to that, or maybe that gives me hope for being differently in the world in some way. There's so many different ways that we impact with literature. And so any closing thoughts on this discussion? Because we have to move forward. And thank you both, by the way. We just walked in here. You didn't know, you know, this was all very spontaneous, and we really appreciate this. And we're trying to get back to spontaneous intellectual dialogue and social discourse, not just about who won the football game, although I'm not anti-sports, you know, but let's get back to some discourse here, even on Super Bowl Sunday.
I just want to thank you, John, for doing this on a regular basis. The show is it going on 3 years yet, or
Yes,
3 years this year? Yeah. I mean, it's a great contribution to culture in the Hudson area and the metropolitan New York area, I guess. Yeah. And I mean, just listening to Phil, and, you know, the few minutes that Phil, I think, spoke here, there's more sincerity, more depth, more genuineness, I think, than you're going to find all year on Hannity or MSNBC. It's realer, it's more genuine. I think this is a real person talking with real emotions, living in the real world, not trying to get ahead on corporate media or whatever. And, you know, God bless it. You know, I think people are very fortunate who have the opportunity to hear him.
I as well want to thank you, John, because you're like rarer than teeth on a hen. You are. What you're trying to accomplish is a rare thing, but it's a precious thing. And you remind me, in a sense, you remind me like of Dick Clark. I know you're like you know, yeah, like it's, in a sense it's bandstanding. It's a dance. You're welcoming us, you know, to dance, to show our steps. And you know, what more can a person ask for? You know, so again, it's a wonderful thing to have this medium called microphone, and to have one organize it as well as you do. Thank you.
Very much, Phil and Richard, and thank you, Enrique, for letting us film here, and thank my lovely wife Claudia for putting up with all of us and filming us. And we'll continue our program, but again, I think also in the future more dialogues here in the community in bookstores like this going forward, and you watching us at home are also welcome to be a part of this conversation. We hope you're enjoying our show so far today, in the two segments so far. The first segment in Washington Square Park in New York City in Greenwich Village, one of the great public spaces, cultural public spaces in the world. And the second part back at the Symposia Bookstore in Hoboken, in a community dialogue there. So we've had various conversations so far. I'm going to finish the show today from our Hoboken apartment, and just sort of be reflective about our process and what we're doing here, and also to let you know that this is also very much, for me, a way to find my identity as a person, being on the air and speaking and creating language and putting my thoughts together and articulating them out there. Also, as an educator, to show others that you can do this, that you can shatter your silences, that I'm sure many of you out there are very capable of having a TV show of your own, or coming on a show like this, of basically saying things out there to the public, whether it's in the form of writing or speaking. And I think this would also help our democracy. It would strengthen our democracy, not to just have a limited number of people, you know, on TV, and, you know, the politicians who are corporate sponsored telling us all what we should do. We, the people, have the power to express what's in our minds. And I think, so I hope that this is inspiring to some people as well. And speaking of inspiration, one of my heroes is a woman named Maxine Green. She wrote this book, among many books, called Releasing the Imagination, Essays on Education, the Arts, and Social Change. And I'm just going to read a very brief excerpt here, because I think this also explains some of the theoretical basis of our show and some of the philosophy behind what we do here. And it says here, from page 64, multiple motivations move people into lifelong learning. Some have to do with breaking through the limits of lived situations, or, more generally speaking, achieving greater fulfillment. No teacher can condemn the effort to reach further, to become different, to surpass. At the same time, we cannot but be aware of the narrowing of the public space today, the erosion of communication, the silences in the place of dialogue. Efficiency, competence, and salability used as standards seem to have eaten away the ideal of citizenship. Indeed, as I described earlier, the demands being made of education today have far more to do with world-class technical achievement than with creating a community of citizens. It is not long since the sight of East Germans clambering fences, of the triumph of solidarity in Poland, of a velvet revolution in Czechoslovakia, fastened our attention on the intensity with which others were pursuing democracy. This book was published in 1996, which was about 7 years after the fall of the Soviet Union and the decline of Russian communism. And they sacrificed so much and thought the democratic utopia was worth dying for. Meanwhile, in our own wealthy country, appalled as we often are by its inequalities and violations, many of us are becoming increasingly cynical. We lose our hopes for what is now scornfully called liberalism. We spend little time thinking seriously or hopefully about the traditions of democracy, of the ways in which they took root in the American experience a little more than 2 centuries ago. Now, even as we ponder critique, emancipatory thinking, reflective practice, and the distinctive pedagogies required for significant change, we may think too seldom about what is problematic in equality and freedom. Indeed, preoccupied as we are, and must be, with the range of important literacies students must gain, we may think too seldom about the connections in a democracy between freedom and relationship, literacy and the public dialogue, happiness and social concern. Speaking of happiness, I'd like to remind our viewers that there is a country in the world called Bhutan. B-H-U-T-A-N is how you spell it. It's located in Indonesia, and it doesn't measure the success of its society based on wealth, but instead on happiness. And it has a measure called gross national happiness, whereas in America we call it gross national product. They care more about the happiness of their citizens. And I think this is also a concern in Europe. One of the things we would love to do with our program is to go to Europe and to really capture the European sensibility and the philosophy, which is that people matter, society, that communities matter, and that it's not this crazy pursuit of wealth at all costs, which America now symbolizes. And it's destroying our planet. And we have to change that now. We have to really change it. And I think, as we've said before in our program, reading books is very important. I discovered an intellectual by the name of Max Lerner, who I hadn't known about. He was one of the great public intellectuals of the 20th century. He wrote for the New York Post, and I would never have known about this man had I not stumbled upon this book at a bookstore in Newark, New Jersey. Okay, this was last Friday, after teaching a class at Essex County College, a class in writing, where I'm always telling my students you have to go find books and discover books to read. And I put that into practice myself when I walked out of class, and I was heading to my favorite cafe, which is over by Rutgers on Halsey Street. And as I'm walking down Halsey Street, I look up at this store. It's like an African store, and they sell merchandise and some oils and stuff. And then I saw a sign that said books. All right, so I felt intrigued, and I went inside, and there was a little tiny bookshelf in this store, and I'm looking through the titles, and this just sort of jumped out at me, and I picked it up, and I said, who is this Max Lerner? Now, those of you who are more intellectually sophisticated than I am probably know him already. I just discovered him. He wrote for the New York Post, and he was the leading liberal commentator in New York City for 4 decades, from 1949 to 1989. He wrote a weekly column in the New York Post, which was then a liberal paper. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you continue watching us, and drop us a line, tell us how you think we're doing on the Public Voice Salon.